As I began to read this book, I found myself becoming slightly annoyed. The idea that those who had succeeded most in life, those that we believed had worked hard and changed the course of their lives on their own, was false seemed a little far-fetched to me. As I continued reading the book, I began to understand exactly what the author was talking about. This book is for anyone who wants to learn what the path of success is. It is for those who may feel that they are just not smart enough to be successful, that they don't have what it takes, or that the advantages that they needed in order to reach success simply were not there for them. In this book, I learned about success. I learned that reaching success depends on so much more than just what we do. Our culture, our family, our legacy, and every little event that has occurred in our lives plays a role in our success if we are willing to take advantage of it. The most important thing that I learned was that there is nothing special about those people who we think of as successful. They did nothing outstanding in life to deserve their success. I have started to see that the way to success is not by trying to do it all by yourself, but by accepting that you will never become a success on your own. Those that have will only gain more. Most often, when we think of people who do things that are out of the ordinary, we think of heroes. We imagine people who have come from the worst backgrounds and have risen up against all odds in order to get where they are. However, that does not seem to be the case. As someone who has never played hockey and has no training in the game, has no chance of competing with those who have trained their entire lives, so is every other area in our lives. One example that the author gives is when boys go out for the Canadian hockey teams. They all start training early on in life. However, due to the cutoff date of their birthdays, some of the boys are much bigger, even if they are the same age. A 10-year and 8-month-old boy is going to be bigger as well as more mature than 10 years and 2-week-old boy. In Canadian hockey, what this means is that the older, even if only by a few months, more mature boy is going to get picked for teams long before the smaller, younger boy. As a result, the older boy is going to be given more opportunities to learn the game, to practice, and to play. As we can imagine, this is going to result in a better player. Why? Is it because the older boy was just better at hockey, or because he was born with a talent for playing? Is it because the other boy didn't try hard enough, or the older boy put in more effort? We tend to believe that each person is chosen for sports teams based on their own merit. We want to believe that if they work hard enough, practice long enough, and want it bad enough, anyone can make it. But is this really the case? Outliers are simply people who have done things that are not the norm. They are geniuses, rock stars, businessmen, lawyers, and many other successful people from all over the world. Whenever we hear about a person who is successful in life, we want to learn about their personalities. We tell ourselves that if we had their talent, we could have been successful as well. We want to assume that certain qualities that the person possesses is what led them to success. Something, however, is wrong with how we think about those who are successful. We want so badly for those that are the most successful to have pulled themselves up to the top by working hard and using their natural given talents to become who they are. Think of Joseph in the Bible, for example. Many people would tell you that being cast out by his own brothers, Joseph ended up being sold as a slave, but by his own talents and hard work, he became the right hand of the Pharaoh. Is that really what happened, though? Or did Joseph find himself in situations where he was able to take advantage of what was going on and place himself at the right hand of the Pharaoh? What about Jeb Bush, the son of one of the presidents of the USA, as well as the brother of another president? He was the grandson of a senator as well as a banker, yet even referred to himself as a self-made man. Was he, or was he the product of his environment? Outliers was written to prove that the idea that we have about how people rise to success simply is not true. Its purpose is to explain that no one simply rises from nothing to become something. While from our perspective, it may seem that a person did all of the work on their own and did rise to the top without any help, most of the time we are not seeing the whole story. Hidden are advantages and opportunities that we know nothing about. They have legacies that allow them to work hard, understand the world around them, and learn in ways that others are unable to. The idea in Outliers is that it does matter where we grew up, as well as when. Our culture and the legacies that are passed down from one generation to the next will determine how successful we can be. We have to stop asking what a successful person is like, what their talents are, and how hard they worked. Instead, we need to start asking where they grew up and where their family is from. When we think about the tallest tree in the forest, do we believe that the tree grew that tall because it grew from the hardiest seed? Or do we take into account where that tree is located, how much sun it was given, what type of soil it is growing in, how lucky it was that a rabbit did not chew it down or a lumberjack did not chop it? Do we just accept that it is the tallest tree because it worked very hard to become that tall? Or do we take into account everything that helped it grow that tall? When we think about trees, we think about everything that went into helping that tree grow. Why do we not think about successful people in the same way? Going back to hockey, did you know that it was found that in any elite hockey group, about 40% of the players are going to be born in the first 3 months of the year? 30% are born in the second quarter of the year, only 20% in the third quarter, and just 10% of hockey players are born in the final 3 months of the year. Is there something special about those that are born in the first 3 months of the year that makes them really good hockey players? Maybe it is the astrological sign that they were born under. No, that's not it. The real explanation is actually much simpler, and there is nothing magical about it. The cutoff age for a class for hockey is January 1st. This means that if a boy turns 10 years old on January 2nd, he could be playing against boys who do not turn 10 until October, November, or December, which leaves a large gap between their ages. This is especially important when it comes to the physical maturity of the boys. In Canada, for example, this is the time when reps start to select their all-star teams. Because the boys who turn 10 early in the year are bigger, have probably been playing longer, and are more mature. They tend to get picked more often. What happens when they are picked by one of the reps? They get extra coaching. They are playing more games. They practice at least 2 times as much or more than the other boys do. As they get older, all of this extra coaching and playtime starts to take effect. They become better players than those who do not receive the advantages of extra playtime and coaching. This means that a junior league is more likely to choose them, and then that means that they are more likely to get into the big leagues. It seems that most things in life seem to play out in much the same way, which is explained more further into the book. 10,000 hours. It's a rule? It was 1971 when the new computer center opened at the University of Michigan. Bill Joy would be one of the thousands of users to pass through that center. In 1971, Bill Joy was just 16 years old. He planned on becoming a mathematician or maybe even a biologist, but once the computer center opened, his entire future changed. Bill Joy spent as much time as he could programming in the computer center, even getting a job with a computer science professor so that he could continue programming during the summer. In 1975, Bill Joy enrolled in the University of California at Berkeley. He continued learning everything he could about programming and software. He helped to rewrite Unix. The version was so great that it is the system that is used today. Millions of computers today run on that operating system. Once he graduated from Berkeley, he co-founded Sun Microsystems and then rewrote Java. Many people, when speaking of Joy, described him as the Thomas Edison of the Internet. His story is told over and over again, always with the same lesson. Back when Bill Joy got into programming, it was a brand new world. You didn't get into computer programming because you had the money or because who your parents were. You had to know what you were doing. Your success was based completely on your accomplishments and your talent. This is a wonderful version that so many of us want to accept. When you look at all the advantages that Bill Joy was given, you really have to wonder if he reached his level of success simply because of his talent and accomplishments. Is innate talent something that actually exists? Yes, talent does exist. Not every person is a gifted athlete. Not every person is musically talented. Not every person is talented in programming. The problem is that many people think that if they are not talented, they cannot reach success in certain areas. For example, if a person wants to play an instrument but does not believe that they are musically talented, they may give up. What science has shown is that talent really does not have that much to do with success, as we thought. Instead, preparation seems to be what is important. Taking a look at violin players who were separated into 3 groups, we can see this. The first group were the violinists who were the most likely to become the world-class soloists. The second group was the violinists who were good, and the third class were those who would probably never play professionally, but instead were likely to teach music in public schools. What was found was that those who were in the top group were practicing at least 30 hours per week by the time they were in their 20s, and had, since they had begun playing, put in at least 10,000 hours worth of practice. Those in the middle group had practiced about 8,000 hours total, and in the lowest group, they had only practiced for about 5,000 hours in total. This was compared with pianists. It was found that those who were most likely to become successful had put in at least 10,000 hours worth of practice in their lifetime. What was found is that there were no natural musicians, or those that did not put in the 10,000 hours worth of practice, but were still good enough to play professionally. What else was found? There was no one who had put in 10,000 hours that was not making it to the top. It was discovered that the only thing that separated those who would be a success from those that would not was the amount of work that they put in, not how much talent they had. Researchers have since determined that if anyone wants to be an expert at anything, they must put in the minimum of 10,000 hours worth of practice. It does not matter what it is that you want to do, whether you want to be a basketball player, a writer, a composer, or a master criminal. You must put in 10,000 hours worth of practice if you want to be the best. This rule even applied to Mozart. It is said that Mozart's early work was not that amazing in his younger years. In fact, he did not write his first masterpiece until he was 21 years old. By the time he was 21, he had been composing for about 10 years. His greatest work was not composed until Mozart had 20 years under his belt. The only person to ever beat this rule was Bobby Fischer. He was a chess grandmaster in just 9 years. For everyone else, it takes at least 10 years. What is 10 years? That is the amount of time that it usually takes for a person to get 10,000 hours of practice. What happens when we think about this in terms of hockey? The child who does not turn 10 years old until the end of the year is not chosen for the all-star team. Therefore, he does not get the extra coaching and practice. This means that he is likely to reach the 10,000 hours of practice that he needs in order to become an expert by the time professional hockey teams start looking at him. However, the older boy has his 10,000 hours in, and he gets chosen for the hockey team. When it comes to 10,000 hours, you have to realize what a huge amount of time that is, and understand that no one is going to reach this by the time they are a young adult if they do not have parents who are helping, supporting, and encouraging them. There is no way that a poor child could reach 10,000 hours of practice at anything given that they may have to hold down a part-time job in order to help the family or watch younger siblings while their parents work. They just don't have the time to practice. The truth is that most people are not going to reach 10,000 hours of anything by the time they are an adult unless they have been put into some type of program. They have to have a special opportunity that no one else does. Going back to Bill Joy, we need to look at the opportunities that he had. As a young boy, his parents gave him books to read whenever he had a question that they could not answer. He was great at math and had plenty of talent. Back in the 70s, computers were enormous, and they cost close to $1 million at the time. If you were lucky enough to have access to a computer, you would have a hard time running time on it because it was very expensive. Back then, programming was done on cardboard punch cards and took a lot of time. Each line was placed on a punch card by using a key punch machine. Thousands of these cards were needed for a complex program. If you made even the smallest mistake, you would have to go through every single card and try to find it. Because of this, it was very hard to become an expert at programming. It was basically impossible for anyone to become an expert by the time they were in their 20s. This was because you were only programming for a few minutes out of each hour that you spent in the computer room. How were you ever going to hit 10,000 hours of practice? Michigan was one of the first universities to switch over to a system that allowed a person to put commands into a computer and see what happened in real time. By the 70s, Michigan's computer center was so powerful that 100 people could practice programming at the same time. There were very few places in the U.S. that had this type of technology. That is where Bill Joy found opportunity. In high school, he was interested in math. He had never worked with computers before. But in 1971, when he found the computer center, that all changed. He found himself in one of the very few places in the entire world where a 17-year-old boy could spend as much time as he wanted programming. Bill Joy lived near the computer center, often staying there all night and walking home in the morning. He said that he spent more time in the computer center than he did going to class. The problem that he faced was that each student had a fixed amount of time to use the computers. When their time would run out, they had no more. Someone learned that there was a glitch in the computer, though. Soon, Bill was able to program as much as he wanted without having to worry about running out of time. All of these opportunities led to him becoming the Bill Joy that we know today. Without one of these opportunities, for example, if the campus did not keep the computer center open all night, he would not have been able to get his 10,000 hours of practice in, and he may have ended up living a very different life. Even when he was asked how many hours he thought that he had put into programming, he stated, maybe 10,000 hours. That's about right. Is 10,000 hours the rule? It would seem so. Even the Beatles themselves put in 10,000 hours of practice before they ever became the sensation that they were. What if they had not been able to practice that much? What if they had not gotten the gigs that they did, which caused them to be in front of an audience the amount of time that they were? Chances are that we would never have known them the way that we know them today. They put in their 10,000 hours, and because of that, they were ready to get on stage when the opportunity arose. What about Bill Gates? The story of Bill Gates is one that many people know. It goes a little like this. After dropping out of Harvard, he started a company called Microsoft with some friends. Through hard work, brilliance, and lots of willpower, he was able to build it into the giant that it is today. Thinking about Bill Gates, many people think of someone who went against the odds, worked hard, and created something out of nothing. Looking a little deeper into his history, they may find something a little different. Bill Gates' father worked as a lawyer in Seattle. His mother's father was a well-off banker. Growing up, Bill often got bored at school. Therefore, his parents had placed him in a private school, Lakeside. This is where the children of Seattle's elite families attended. It was his second year at Lakeside when a computer club was started. There was a mother's club at the school. Each year they would have a rummage sale and often found themselves wondering what the money should be spent on. Some of the money went to various programs or to teachers, but this year it was going to go toward a computer terminal. The year was 1968, and most of the colleges in the U.S. did not have computer clubs. The computer that was purchased was one of the best. It was not one where a child would have to learn programming by using punch cards. Instead, it was a teletype. The terminal was connected to a mainframe computer in Seattle. Bill Gates spent a lot of his time in the computer room. He, as well as some of the other students, began teaching themselves programming. Of course, buying time on the mainframe was expensive. However, as soon as the children ran out of money, the mothers were raising more. Then, as luck would have it, one of the mothers of a student at Lakeside was a founder of C-Cube and asked if the computer club would like to test the company's software on the weekends. In exchange, they would get free programming time. Of course, the computer club jumped at the chance. Before long, the company went out of business, but Gates began hanging around the University of Washington's Computer Center. Information Sciences Incorporated decided that they would let Gates and his friends have free computer time if they would work on software for the company. Gates skipped athletics in order to program. He was programming at night, on the weekends, getting at least 20 to 30 hours in. He'd even sneak out of his bed at night in order to go program. Did Bill Gates get where he is because of talent and hard work? Of course not. Bill Gates was provided with many opportunities in his life at a time when he could make it big as a programmer. He had access to a computer that many college students didn't have. This led to the series of events that we just discussed, which in turn led to Bill Gates being one of the top programmers in the world. Why? Because he got his 10,000 hours in at a very young age. Every opportunity that he had gave him the chance to practice programming. So when he decided that he was going to create his own company, he actually had far more than 10,000 hours of practice under his belt. How many people on this planet have had the opportunities that Bill Gates did in his life? Even he himself stated that he doubted that there were even 50 other people who were given all of those opportunities. He became who he is because of some very lucky events that happened in his life. Thinking about the stories of Bill Gates, the Beatles, Bill Joy, and even the hockey players, we begin to see a pattern of success. All of them are very talented people. However, we have to see what distinguishes them from the rest of the talent is the opportunities that they had in their lives. When we look at it this way, we find that lucky breaks don't seem to be the exception, but instead, they are the rule. hidden opportunities that each of these successes benefited from, which led to success, seems to be what happens in every success story. What about the rich people in the world? Does the same rule apply to them? Out of the 75 richest people in the world, 14 of them are Americans that were born within a 9-year period in the 1800s. The fact that 20% of the names on the list come from people from one generation in one country has to tell us something. What happened during that time? It was during the 1860s and 70s that the economy in America went through a huge transformation. Railroads were built, Wall Street was born, industrial manufacturing was booming, the economy was changing. If you were born in the 1840s, you were not old enough to take advantage of the changes that were taking place. If you were born in the 1820s, you were just too old to accept the changes and take advantage of them. But those that were born in the 30s, they were set up for success. They had opportunities that no one before or after has had. They were born in the right place at the right time. Does the year that you were born really matter? Bill Gates was born in 1955. Paul Allen, the third richest man at Microsoft, in 1953. Steve Ballmer was born in 1956. And what about Steve Jobs? He was born in 1955. All of these men were great successes in the programming business, and they were all born very close together. Why? 1975 marked the age of the personal computer. If you were born before 1952, you would probably think about personal computers as a fad, something that would never take off. If you were born after 1958, you would find that you were still in high school in 1975, so you would be too young to take advantage of the opportunities. This leaves a very short period of time for people to be born in order to take advantage of the opportunities that the personal computer age would provide. Again, notice the years that these men were born: 1955, 1953, 1956. The year that you were born does play a huge role in how successful you're going to be in life. It is just one more hidden opportunity that many people seem to overlook when they are thinking about the success of men like Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Does a genius IQ really matter? Christopher Langan grabbed the attention of a nation as he appeared on 1 vs. 100. He was called the smartest man in America. His IQ is 45 points higher than Einstein's. Do you know who Christopher Langan is? Chances are that if you didn't watch 1 vs. 100, you have no idea who he is. He is the public face of a genius. He has been on many different news shows, magazines have profiled him, and documentaries have been made about him. Why? Because he has such a high IQ. When given an IQ test by 2020, his score was too high to be measured. As a child, he was able to take tests without ever having to study for them. He fell asleep during his SATs and still got a perfect score. He was able to draw as a teenager with such precision that his drawings looked like a photograph. He could play the guitar like a pro. His family was amazed by him. When he appeared on 1 vs. 100, he made it to $250,000 and then just cashed out. He didn't continue on to get the million, but instead decided that he was going to leave ahead. A very smart decision according to many. Lewis Terman met a man much like Langan just after the end of World War I. His name was Henry Cowell. Henry grew up very poor. He was not able to get along with other children, so he had not been to school since he was just 7 years old. Working as a janitor in a one-room schoolhouse near the Stanford campus, he would sneak away to play the piano in the school. He was very talented. Terman specialized in IQ testing. The Stanford Binet IQ test was created by Terman. He decided that he was going to test Henry Cowell's IQ. It turned out that Cowell's IQ was near genius level. This made Terman wonder how many other people were out there with genius-level IQs that were simply unaware of it. Terman found many other geniuses and decided that he was going to spend his life studying them. He had teachers in California pick out their brightest students. Those students were given an intelligence test. Out of those, he tested the top 10% with an IQ test. Anyone who scored above 130 was given another test. Then Terman selected the brightest of the groups. These children would become known as the termites. These termites became the subjects of a very famous psychological study. Terman spent the rest of his life watching his termites. They were tested, tracked, and measured. Notes were taken about their marriages, illnesses, psychological health, and even their jobs. Terman was there for all of his termites, doling out advice, counsel, and even writing letters of recommendation for them. It looked as if all the termites were going to be successes. Terman believed that they would be the elite of the U.S. Today, many people still believe that those who have the highest IQs have the greatest potential. This is why they are placed into gifted programs in schools. Intelligence tests are given when people apply for colleges, and even for many jobs. Most people would gladly raise their IQ by 30 points if given the option. They assume that having a higher IQ would help them get ahead in life. We cannot imagine anything holding a genius back. Outlier tells us that success is less about talent and more about opportunity. Is that the case when it comes to geniuses? The average IQ is 100. Those that have an IQ below 70 would be considered as mentally disabled. In order to get into one of the more competitive graduate programs, you will need to have an IQ of about 115. The fact is that the higher your IQ is, the more likely it is for you to get a lot of education. However, science has found that this only works up to a point. Once a person reaches an IQ of 120, having anything higher does not mean that more advantages will come. We understand that a person with an IQ of 130 will be a better thinker than a person with an IQ of 75. However, a person with an IQ of 130 has the same chance of winning a Nobel Peace Prize as a person with an IQ of 180. There are no extra advantages to having an IQ above 120. What this means for us is that we don't have to worry about being the best or the smartest. All we have to be is good enough in order to reach success. Think about basketball. A person who is 5'3" has very little chances of making it big. A person who is 5'3" has very little chances of making it big. A person who is 6 feet has a much bigger advantage over the 5'3" person. However, does a person who is 6'1" or 6'2" have an advantage over a person who is 6 feet? No. What is going to make the difference between the players that are 6, 6'1", and 6'2" is how they play, the amount of work that they have put in. They don't have to be the tallest in order to make it big, but they do have to be tall enough. Terman, however, believed that because his termites were the brightest of the brightest, they would have every advantage and they would become the most successful people in the nation. What really happened? By the time all of the termites were adults, Terman could see the error in his thinking. Sure, some of the termites became authors, some held public office positions. 2 of them became Supreme Court justices. 1 was a municipal court judge. They were members of the state legislature, and 1 of them became a very prominent state official. Very few of them were actually well known, though. Many of them did earn a good income, not a great one. Most of the careers of the termites were nothing more than ordinary, and then there were the failures. Not one had won a Nobel Peace Prize. If Terman had randomly picked a group of children with all different IQs, he would have the same type of results. Their outcome did not depend upon their IQs. Just because the termites had a very high IQ, it did not mean that they were going to be successful. Does having a genius IQ really matter? Part 2. When we look at the story of Chris Langan, we find that he was the son of a woman from San Francisco. His mother had 4 sons. Each of them had a different father. Chris was the oldest son. He had never known his father. His mother's second husband had died while in Mexico. The third husband committed suicide, and the fourth husband was a man named Jack Langan. Chris stated that he was so poor growing up that he didn't even have a pair of matching socks. The boys only had 1 outfit each, which they would wash in the bathtub as they stood naked waiting for their clothes to dry because they had nothing else to put on. Jack Langan was an abusive man. He would lock the kitchen cabinets so that the boys could not get in the food. He would go out on drinking binges, disappearing for days at a time. He would even use a bullwhip to discipline the boys. He would get a job and lose it, then get another. The cycle continued, never providing the family with any stability. When the boys were young, still in grade school, the family moved to Bozeman, Montana. It was during this time that Chris began lifting weights. They were living in a new town where they were seen as nothing more than deadbeats. Chris got into fights and even knocked a boy out. Chris was offered 2 scholarships upon graduation. One was to Reed College in Oregon and the other to the University of Chicago. Chris chose to go to Reed. He later stated that it was a huge mistake, going from a boy who had grown up in Montana to being surrounded by a bunch of city kids was a real culture shock. He was amazed at how inquisitive they were, how they were always asking questions, and how different their lifestyle was compared to his own. Sadly, Chris lost his scholarship because his mother failed to fill out the proper paperwork. Even though he tried to talk to people at the university in order to ensure he could stay, they refused to help him. In his first semester, he had straight A's. However, he had to leave before the final exams. He had all F's. This was when he returned to Bozeman. He worked in construction and as a firefighter before enrolling in Montana State. It was during this time that his transmission failed in his vehicle. His brothers had been using it while he was gone the previous summer and had driven it on the railroad tracks. Chris had no money to repair or replace the car. Again, he tried talking to his professors, telling them what had happened, simply asking for them to move him to an afternoon class instead of a morning one. Chris had found a way to get to class in the afternoon, but he could not make the morning classes. His request was denied, so he went to his advisor. Same result. Chris stated that at this point, he decided he could do without the higher education system. When asked if he would take a job teaching at Harvard, hypothetically, he stated that Harvard was a glorified corporation, that money was what made them tick. He said that working there would mean that he would have to do what the man said in order to get his paycheck. After all, that was why they were there, to make sure that you didn't step out of line. Of course, that is paraphrased, however. It does tell us a lot about Chris Langan. While the story of his life and the things that happened to him are heartbreaking, they also seem a little odd. Let's think about the fact that his mother did not fill out his paperwork for his scholarship. Instead of the school working with him, which they often do, they simply let him go, telling him that there was nothing they could do. When his car broke down, instead of helping Chris transfer to an afternoon class, which most professors would have no problem doing in order to ensure that their students were able to continue their education, he was shot down, not once, but twice. When you listen to the way that Chris talked about Harvard as a place where the man makes you do what they want you to do, you could see that he has no understanding of the culture which he is talking about. The exact opposite of Chris Langan is Robert Oppenheimer. Robert attended Harvard and then went on to Cambridge. At Cambridge, he was tutored by a man named Patrick Blackett. Blackett forced Robert to attend the minutiae of experimental physics, which Robert hated. As time went on, Robert became very emotionally unstable, and then using some of the chemicals that he got from the laboratory, he attempted to poison Blackett. Blackett was lucky and realized that something was not right. He informed the university as to what had happened, and Robert ended up being put on probation. Looking at Langan and Oppenheimer, you will see 2 very intelligent students. One of them tried very hard to attend school, while the other one tried to kill his tutor. The student that was trying hard was unable to get any help from those that he went to, while the one that tried to poison his tutor was given probation. Both of these men were geniuses. However, they were completely different from each other. What made them so different? Practical intelligence. It was the ability to know what to say, when, and to whom that made these 2 men so different. Had Langan known what he was supposed to say and to whom he was supposed to say it to, he may have been able to finish college. If Langan had been born into a different family, where he had learned the social skills that he needed, he would have probably graduated from college at a very early age. However, because he did not know how to speak up for himself, because he was unable to negotiate with people who were in a position of authority, he was handicapped when it came to navigating the world beyond the town that he grew up in. It is the culture that you grow up in which determines how you react to those around you, and this has a huge impact on how successful you can be in life. Today, Chris lives in Missouri and has done nothing particularly fascinating with his life. He takes care of the farm, reads books, and loves his wife. He knows that there are very few, if any, people out there that are smarter than he is. The papers that he works on will probably never be published. He even admits that he should try harder to find a mainstream publisher, but by all accounts, Langan has given up. He has accepted his defeat. This man, who is smarter than anyone else, was unable to communicate with his professors in order to ensure that he was able to continue his education. This is something that people with much simpler minds can easily do. Chris had grown up in a world where he had to make it on his own. It does not matter who you are, how smart you are, or how hard you try. No one becomes a success by trying to make it on their own. Joe Flum and his lessons. Joe Flum is the last founding partner of Skadden, Arps, Slate, Mager, and Flum, a very important law firm. Flum's parents were Jewish immigrants, and he grew up during the Depression in the Borough Park neighborhood in Brooklyn. It was late 1940s, a time when Jewish people were not treated with respect. Flum and one other kid in his entire class at Harvard did not have a job at the end of the hiring season. His professor told him about a startup firm, the most likely place for a Jewish lawyer to get a job at the time, and Flum decided he'd take the chance. He met with the men, and they told him all about the risk that he would be taking if he were to go with the firm as they did not have a single client yet. He met with the men, and they told him all about the risk that he would be taking if they were to go with the firm as they did not have a client yet. The starting salary was just $3,600 a year. Skadden and Arps were the only two lawyers working for the firm at the time. The three of them worked hard, taking whatever comes to their door. By 1954, the firm began to grow and soon had 100 lawyers, then 200 and 300. Today, there are close to 2,000 attorneys employed by the firm in 23 different offices all around the world, and the company makes well over $1 billion per year. At this point, it should be understood that these rags to riches stories don't just happen. What were the extraordinary opportunities that Flum had in his life? Being the child of a Jewish immigrant near the time of the Second World War, you might think that his extraordinary opportunities were few and far between. As far as Flum's story goes, it is his disadvantages that were his advantages. During the 40s and 50s, the law firms in New York were more like a private club than they were like the law firms we see today. The firms were very particular about who they hired, meaning that if the lawyer did not have blue eyes and fair skin, it was unlikely for him to get a job with an existing firm. The firms at the time did not go to court and participate in litigation. Instead, they were corporate lawyers. The firm that Flum was hired into accepted anything that came through the door. They had to in order to make ends meet. It was this that set them up for success. As the country began to change, as hostile takeovers of companies became something that was common, firms were actually turning to Flum to handle the cases. He had experience in litigation, he was willing to get his hands dirty, and they wanted to remain gentlemen. The white shoe firms were not ready for the change that came, but Flum was. It was the fact that because he was a Jew and was unable to work with one of the white shoe firms that allowed him to gain the experience that he needed in order to build a successful firm as the times changed. Their skills became very valuable. Your ancestors and your future. Who would have thought that your success in life could have any relation to who your ancestors were? I'm not talking about who your grandfather was, or even who your great-grandfather was. I'm talking about 8, 10, or even more generations back. It is said that some of the ways that you behave is going to depend on where your ancestors came from. For example, if your ancestors came from Ireland to the US, it is more likely for you to become aggressive if they were herdsmen. Why? Herdsmen had to be aggressive. They had to do whatever it took for them to keep their herd safe. You see, if one out of their herd were to become injured or stolen, it could be the difference in their family eating or starving to death. They had to make sure that everyone and everything was afraid of them. The immigrants brought this culture with them to the U.S. While they immigrated, they continued to be herdsmen. This was, after all, what they knew best. They brought with them a culture of honor. In one case, a man lived next door to a gas station. For months, he had found himself the butt of many jokes. Pranks were pulled on him by people who hung around the station, as well as those that worked there. He warned them multiple times to stop, and it was well known that he had a short temper, yet no one listened. One morning, He had enough and took aim with his shotgun. After both barrels were emptied, one person was dead and two were injured. When the jury was polled, it turned out that only one of them felt that the man was guilty. The rest of them felt that he would not have been much of a man if he had not stood up for himself and shot those that were making fun of him. This is how a culture of honor works. It is considered an appropriate response to shoot someone who insults you. Some reading this might think that this sounds absurd. Of course, it does. Unless you came from a culture of honor. This is why there is a higher murder rate in the South than in any other area of the country. Those that grew up in the South are likely descendants of those that lived in a culture of honor. Plane crashes and ethics. Imagine you are a co-pilot of an airplane. You have been told by air traffic control that you have to continue to circle the airport until they can make room for you to land. You look down and see that you are almost out of fuel. You cannot continue to wait to land. What do you do? That is what happened during one flight. The pilot missed the runway and had to circle around once again. The captain was flying the plane and the co-pilot was talking to air traffic control. Many times, the captain told the co-pilot to inform air traffic control that they were in an emergency. They didn't have fuel. The co-pilot calmly told air traffic control that they were running out of fuel. This mistake was huge. Air traffic control was not told that there was an emergency. They were not informed that the plane was out of fuel, simply that they were running out. The plane ended up crashing because the urgency of the situation was not communicated properly. Instead, the co-pilot spoke in a nonchalant manner. You have to understand that air traffic controllers deal with hundreds of different flights all day long. They only listen for certain words to let them know that there is a true emergency. They are told all of the time that planes are running out of fuel. Running out does not mean that they are out. The fact is that when any plane lands, they should be running out of fuel because they have finished the flight. When you speak to air traffic controllers, you have to be able to stand up for yourself, to be aggressive, and make sure your point is getting across. Why did this plane go down? The pilot and the co-pilot were unable to get their point across. Imagine if this pilot or co-pilot were from New York. Chances are that they would have just said, "Listen, we have to land now. We are out of fuel and this plane is coming out of the sky one way or another." However, the pilot and the co-pilot flying the plane were from Colombia. This is a place where authority is not questioned. They have a different culture than those from the United States. When push comes to shove, those that are from the US do not see anyone in a position of power as any different as they are. They see themselves as equal. This is why it is easy for Americans to question a doctor and take control of situations where people from other countries would be intimidated. This is not to say that this makes Americans any better than those from other countries, simply different. Colombians are more likely to speak to someone in a position of power as a subordinate. They do not think of themselves as equals to those who are in positions of power. We also have to consider that these two that were flying the plane were from Colombia and were communicating with American air traffic controllers. The men from Colombia were speaking as subordinates, while the Americans were speaking, well, the way Americans do. This is a communication barrier. Different cultures can cause cultural miscommunication. This is just one more example of how where we are from plays a huge role in our ability to succeed in life. Our culture is going to dictate how we communicate. Think back to Chris Langan. The culture that he grew up in dictated his communication skills, which caused it to be impossible for him to obtain any help from his professor or advisor. Does hard work matter? It would seem at this point that the only way for a person to become an outlier is by taking advantage of the special opportunities that they have in their lives. However, if we look back on the stories of the men that we talked about, that is not the case. Bill Joy, Bill Gates, Flum, and all of the other men had one thing in common. They worked very hard. It is said that no man who rises before dawn 360 days a year will fail to make their family rich. Hard work is something that is necessary if we want to see success in our lives. Hard work is something that even the outliers have to do. We find in our society that while everyone has the ability to work hard, it is the outliers that seem to work the hardest. There are those out there who do not feel like hard work is important, but rather spend their time relaxing, even if it means that their families will be poor. Why? It all goes back to the culture in which your family came from. Each culture has a different belief system when it comes to hard work. Some of them believe that hard work is the main purpose in life. Take, for example, the Chinese who work in the rice paddies. Working in a rice paddy is extremely hard work with extremely long hours. It is nothing like working on a farm in the US, where you get to ride a tractor or other piece of farm equipment all day long. Working in a rice paddy means that you are working in the water with the leeches to ensure that the crop does not fail. There is no off-season, no time to rest. It is work 360 days per year. Often, when we think about Asians, we think about their mathematical abilities. Have you ever found yourself wondering why Asians are so good at math? We like to think that they have some sort of math gene that just makes them really good at it, but the truth is much simpler. Let's take, for example, if an American child is asked to add 43 and 56, the American child has to take the time to figure out the problem. However, because of the way that numbers are stated in Chinese, it is much easier for a Chinese child to figure out the same problem. They would be asked what 4 10s 3 and 5 10s 6 equals. That makes things very simple. They can easily answer 9 10s 9, whereas the American child would have to add 3 plus 6 to get 9, and 50 plus 40 to get 90, then 90 plus 9 to get 99. Asians are great at math because of the way that it is taught to them, not because they have some amazing mathematical genius gene. What this means for us is that the culture that we are raised in can affect our success in life. Chinese people tend to have more success in jobs that have to do with numbers because of the way mathematics is taught to them. They are also known to be hardworking, willing to put in the extra hours in the library to ensure they pass their tests, or working late into the night to ensure that their projects are completed. Their culture has affected the way they view work. The problem with education. Have you ever thought about the American education system and wondered what was going wrong? We hear schools asking all the time for new facilities, new computers, or other special equipment that is supposed to help kids learn better. We often find ourselves wondering if the schools are doing all that they should to be teaching our children. If you take a look at the exams that the children take each year at the beginning of the school year, as well as the exams that are taken at the end of each school year, you would probably find that the schools are working. This means that something else is causing some of the children to struggle. If you take a look at the end of the year exams, you will find that the majority of the children, no matter what class they are from, are about the same level of education level. They are doing math at about the same level, and they are reading at about the same level. However, if you look at the beginning of the year exams, after the children have been on vacation all summer, what you find is going to be much different. You will see that over the summer, the richest kids were able to improve their education, while the poorest seemed to have lost what they learned the previous year. Why? The reason is because the richest children have the chance, the opportunity, to continue learning all summer long. They are put into summer programs, they go to camp, they have tutors, and their parents make sure that they are reading during the summer. The poorest children, they are spending their summers playing with their friends, hanging out in front of the television, and basically doing whatever makes them happy. They do not get tutors, summer programs, camps, or other advantages that the rich children do. This means that while the rich children's parents ensure that their education is continuing all summer and the child is making great strides, the poorest children are often forgetting what they have learned. Their parents do not focus on education during the summer months. When the kids go back to school in the fall and the tests are taken, it looks as though the education system is failing, but it's not the education system, it's summer vacation that is failing them. In the US, summer vacation is something that many people think of as a permanent thing. When the school year runs long because of snow days, parents get upset that school is taken away from their children's vacation. Why? It is because of the culture in the US. Let's take a look at China really quickly before we go any further. China does not give their children a summer vacation. Why would they, after all? They believe that if a person gets up before the sun 360 days a year, they will be rich. If hard work is something that they expect of the rice farmers, it is likely that they expect it of their children as well. As a result, Chinese children's test scores are much higher than those of American children. Now, if we look at America's culture, we can begin to understand why summer vacation seems so normal to us. As a farmer in the US, you have to plant your seed in the spring months. You don't have to work really hard in order to get those seeds to grow. You just have to wait for the rain and keep the bugs away. During the summer, you don't have a lot of work to do. Your job is to wait for the crops to grow. Then in fall, you harvest them. We have a culture that has always believed that summer, The time that the plants are growing is a time for rest. It is when things slow down and farmers can enjoy life a little bit. This has helped to shape the culture of public schools. It was also believed that the mind was much like the soil. If it is overworked, it will exhaust. When a farmer plants his crops, he has to make sure that he is giving the fields time off between crops in order to not exhaust the soil. It was believed that the mind worked in much the same way. However, that was the belief years ago, and today we know that it really is not true. An engaged mind is one that is going to be open to more learning. The more you continue to learn, the more you are going to want to learn. Your mind does not need time off from learning. Yet we still have this idea that children need summer vacation, and that is affecting their level of education. You see, our schools do work. They just need to have more time to work. They need to have the ability to provide all the students with the same education all year. What we would see is that the rich kids will not be getting any special opportunities to learn that were not open to the poorest kids. Everyone would be spending their time learning, instead of some learning and some wasting their summers in front of a television. Putting in the work is what is going to make a person successful in life. The child who spends his summers with tutors, in programs, or at camp, continuing his education, is going to do better in life than the child who spent their summer lying on the couch and watching television. While Outliers have been about those that have had extraordinary opportunities, it has also been about those that put in the work. Take Bill Gates, for example. Sure, he had some amazing opportunities that no one else did, but he was willing to put in the work in order to become the success that he is. What if he had not taken advantage of the opportunities? What if he decided that he wanted to lay on the couch instead and watch television? Can you imagine where we would be right now if Bill Gates was not so hardworking and determined? So many times we tell ourselves, I shouldn't have to work this hard. But are we really working that hard? Are we getting up at 4 a.m. just to get a jump start on the day, and then going out and working in rice paddies for 12 or 16 hours at a time? Do we get up in the morning to work all day, go to school, come home, do homework, and then take care of our families? We are capable of so much more than many of us are doing, but what we are doing is determined by our culture. What does this mean? If you come from a slow-paced culture where the weekends are for laying around the house, chances are that this is what you are going to do. On the other hand, if you come from a culture where weekends are spent getting things done, working a second job, volunteering, or staying busy in some other way, chances are that this is what you are going to do. Your culture determines how hard you will work, and that is going to determine your success. Given every opportunity in the world, if you are not willing to put in the work, you will never succeed. We hear stories all the time about people who are born into unfortunate circumstances, pulling themselves out of them and becoming amazing successes. But are these stories true? They are not. In the same sense that it is not true that Bill Gates became a success on his own. He was given opportunities, which he took advantage of. He worked hard, and because of his cultural legacy, he was able to become the man that he is today. It is stories like those that make it seem as if a person was able to create success completely on their own that give the world a false hope. They want to believe that if success is meant to happen, it will happen. But as we have learned, that is not the case. It is so easy for us not to be honest about where we come from. It is easy for us to try and take credit for all of the things that we have accomplished in life, even when all of the things that we have achieved are a result of the things that we have faced in life, as well as the opportunities that we have had. Even Bill Gates himself admits how lucky he was. He understands that without all of the wonderful things that happened to him, he would not be the man that he is today. Looking at success, we can now understand that it comes not from the work of one person. Not one person can say that they did it all by themselves. Success is no longer a mystery. Success has nothing to do with how smart a person is. If that was the case, Chris Langan would be the most successful man on the planet. Yet, he is not. It is the result of advantages that people had throughout their lives, the community in which they grew up in, their legacy, and hard work. What we find is that those whom we consider outliers are not outliers at all. They are instead the result of all these things that have happened in a person's life. We are all given opportunities and advantages, even when we cannot see them. Flum could have looked at his disadvantages as just that, but even his disadvantages became an advantage for him. We have to be able to identify these opportunities so that we can take advantage of them. stories of those people who have pulled themselves up from nothing to become something amazing are wonderful to hear. They give us hope and make us think that anything is possible. However, these stories are not true. They are not true in the sense that all of the information is not given. Sure, the person may come from nothing and become a great success, but they did not do it on their own. They were given opportunities that they took advantage of. Now we are able to understand that these so-called outliers are not outliers at all. They are the result of things that have happened in their lives, advantages, opportunities, and their legacy.